Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, illiberal democracies aren't just right-leaning and authoritarian. They, in and of itself, are broken. They are broken by the radical conservative patriarchy who view women and children not just as second-class citizens, but as a means to an end to be able to stay in power and keep the very people at bay, to not go against them and not empower the opposition party who they have stifled for far too long. And newsflash, that happens because they're using existing opposition rhetoric, all of these vague things like asking for aid and support. It clearly is not working. These people in power continue to use their levers of nepotism, corruption, and political position as a means to intimidate and look down on these particular individuals, women and their children, as well as opposition parties from their ivory tower when they say that these people are less and just a means to be able to support what they do. The path to victory of closing opposition is simple. It's threefold. Number one, we're going to nuance it to strongly pivot, and this is making a comparative of the different alternatives they have in society, which we posit are not working, and as a consequence, you need to redirect those time, energy, and capacity elsewhere, trying this new approach in terms of looking and using women as a means of propaganda. Secondly, talking about the importance of empowering women and how that can turn a tide at first in terms of these things, because to a large extent, side opposition jumps onto the idea of, hey, we want to win seats, you want to get representation. Bro, it's a fucking illiberal democracy for the reasons you characterized. You don't have any shot at the structural change that you want. You jump the gun. We think and we take a very fair burden to say this is a start to be able to crack at the surface, to be able to have any chance at lobbying. And thirdly, I'm going to talk at the opportunity cost of all this strategy and why it should be the primary focus of their campaign, something opening missed. The first thing is, what is the nature of an opposition party vis-a-vis the seating people who are incumbents? And why exactly is the pivot to women a strategic stakeholder in order to open the path for a stronger opposition case? We need to understand that opening government to some extent touches on this, but it's rather assumptive and a bit lazy in terms of their mechanism. They're kind of jumpy. We agree in principle that it leads to all of these things like international support. Let me mech that out. We also agree with opening opposition that illiberal democracies are kind of dangerous and all of these particular things. But we think that independent of opening debate, and this is us agreeing with opening opposition that the framing of opening government was kind of wonky and unstrategic because they tried to say like, well, the democracy kind of works, women can vote, therefore we get solvency. We're going to take the higher burden and say, even though it's absolutely fucked and you can't do anything, it's still important to be able to shed light on the very vulnerable stakeholder, women and their children who have been oppressed and have been harmed for far too long. It's a worthwhile strategy and piece of propaganda to be able to use. Why is that the case? A, because of the visceral nature of women who are very vulnerable and are a group who is suffering. In terms of like the math of it, women and men in terms of like that gender split, it's somewhat equal, but the way in which they're framed and positioned in terms of socio-political discussion are that they are largely a minority who are treated as second-class citizens. That is to say that these particular women, when you mention it just in the news, just become muddled as another statistic. Oh, X number of people have been displaced. X number of people need food. They're being wrecked because of inflation and lost their jobs. But the point in which you put an identity and face behind that statistic is the point in which you humanize the particular individual. It becomes a very palatable message to be able to show the international community that people are suffering. That is as opposed to opposition's cookie-cutter approach of saying general stuff. We have an authoritarian ruler. There's inflation. We need resources. Bruh, don't shout louder. Improve the frame and improve the argument. That is to say, you need to clamor to the international community that these people are fucking suffering. What turned the tide of geopolitical conflicts like Ukraine and Gaza or the refugee crisis in the Middle East? When we showed pictures of pregnant mothers nursing and carrying their children amidst a freaking battlefield with all of this dust, scars, and blood, trying to find a place of solace while their fathers and husbands are fighting the good fight. It's in the interest of these opposition parties, who are the political minority, to use the very people who are most suffering as a means to be able to forward the case. And that just becomes more palatable to the West, CNN, BBC, because they're like, we know what's happening now. Feminists and all of these woke individuals who are eager to throw money and genuflect to ideology start foaming in the mouth and saying, yeah, we gotta do something about it. And as a consequence, that's exactly where you solve opening metric of them saying money and resources are proximate. Closing opposition, my G. Aniket, go for it.
Yeah, I have just one question. If it's so authoritarian, it means anything that you try to do can be suppressed through media as well. I think your framing then becomes too uncompatible even if your argument actually works. I will give you credit for that.
Yes, but the point in which you don't do anything, then it becomes symmetric at worst, meaning any form of messaging you say is going to get drowned out. But the point in which social media outlets and all of these woke algos that we see, hence basic white bitches in the US being able to know about Ukraine because of the Starbucks atrocities, are now going to be able to be more empathetic about the push when they see someone of their own gender, someone they associate with, suffering. We think that on your side, the narrative is largely broken because the communication that you try to raise is just something everyone is desensitized to. But the point in which you frame not just women, but also their children as very vulnerable becomes a legitimate and effective banner cry to be able to bolster opposition parties. I get what Op's saying. Op's saying, we want seats, bro. We want representation. That comes long term. The short term is being able to feed the militia, feed the people who are trying to fight the good fight, while their fathers, brothers, and husbands are fighting the good fight out there in war. We need to protect women as well, who are very vulnerable. And it's of strategic political interest that these opposition parties use the faces of the vulnerable to show that they are more than a statistic we are very proud to propose.